welcome to episode 39 of the See-Through Podcast, a podcast that creates transparency on disabilities and the champions with them. I am your host, Lance Johnson, and I live, create, and podcast from Brooklyn, New York, with an inherited retinal disease called retinitis pigmentosa, or RP for short. If you're listening on the day of this release, happy 4th of July. My guest today is Olivia O'Connell. She just graduated high school, and she is a very driven, very smart young lady. I feel old saying that. Am I too young to say that? I don't know. And Olivia is legally blind due to she was born with albinism, which is a group of inherited disorders where there is little or no production of the pigment melanin, and the type and amount of melanin your body produces determines the color of your skin, hair, and eyes. Sometimes a lack of melanin can impact the eyes, which can cause some visual impairments. And while people with albinism are usually as healthy as the rest of the population, people with albinism can be classified as disabled because of the associated visual impairments. In this episode, we cover a lot of new ground. We cover her visual impairments. We cover her high school experience living with them. And we even have a fun talk about how people with albinism are portrayed in pop culture and movies. So yeah, there's some new stuff in this episode that you will not want to miss. But before you hear that episode, please subscribe or follow this podcast on whatever streaming platform you're listening on. And if you like this episode and you like this podcast, do me a favor, share it with people. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts. That helps me a lot. And you can also follow this podcast on social media. The handle is at See-Through-Pod. With all that said, let's hear the episode. Here's episode 39 featuring Olivia O'Connell. Olivia, welcome to the See-Through Podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk with you. You just graduated high school.
I did.
That's a big one.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of work.
A lot of work.
But it feels really good.
Yeah, I had a dream the other night that I was in college, and this is actually a dream that I have all the time for whatever reason. I'm in college again. And I'm failing.
Oh no!
And I know I'm gonna fail. And I'm gonna fail. And in the dream, I'm like panicking about failing. And then I wake up and I'm like, oh man, I'm so happy I'm not in school anymore.
Yeah, I like school. I know I'm kind of weird. I'm the kid who always loved school.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's hard, but I love it.
Well, that's good. That's good. We need people who like school. I was always indifferent. Like I liked certain parts of school, and then the other parts of it I hated. And if it captivated me, I loved it. If it didn't, it was hard for me to give it any attention.
Yeah.
I'm one of those people. But speaking of college, you just got accepted into the University of Michigan, right?
Yeah, I'm going there for college. I'm so excited.
Nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, no one wants to hear me talk about you. I think people want to hear you talk about you. So if you could give everyone listening and just kind of intro to who you are, and then we'll go from there.
Okay. So my name is Olivia, and I am obviously, as you just said, an incoming freshman at the University of Michigan. I was born with oculocutaneous albinism, which is a rare genetic condition that causes an absence of melanin in the skin, hair, and eyes. And there's a lot of stereotypes surrounding albinism. You know, people think that everybody with albinism is like stark white with red eyes. A lot of that stuff is just not true. But basically, albinism, one of the main effects that most people with albinism has, and there's so many different subtypes and types of albinism and ways that it affects someone. But usually a person with albinism also has a visual impairment because melanin in the eyes helps create correct human vision, or what we consider to be correct, which is 20/20 vision. So a lot of people with albinism have a visual impairment to start off with. And then a lot of people also have like kind of what I call like sub eye conditions. So for me, albinism is kind of the umbrella condition, but I have like 5+ different other eye conditions that are indirectly caused by albinism, like nystagmus or strabismus, astigmatism, photophobia, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I've just graduated high school, and I've had a really kind of a crazy high school experience. I've had a lot of changes to my vision, a lot of stuff that I have had to learn to cope with. And I'm really excited to talk about that today, because I think that I really want to help somebody who may or may not have been in my situation or will be in my situation, through the lessons that I've learned, and I'm still learning, and I'm excited to go to college and keep learning. But aside from the vision part of it, I'm very passionate about social justice and activism, both social and political. And so that's part of what I'm going into college to study. So I'm really excited about that.
Okay. So do you know what your major is going to be?
I think I'm definitely double majoring. I might add a third major or a minor, but political science, international studies, and history are the 3 things that I'm looking at right now.
Overachiever over here.
No, I don't.
Gonna triple major.
We have to see how it works out.
I was like, "What are you majoring in?" You're like, "Well, I'm gonna triple major with a minor." I mean, hey, if you do that, that's awesome.
I mean, a lot of them, for me, it's not as difficult as somebody who would be like double majoring or triple majoring in like 3 very different subjects. Mine are all similar, so you can kind of double count.
Yeah, a lot of overlap.
Yeah, you can double count some stuff.
So you have, as you pronounced it, albinism?
Yeah.
All right, so you have albinism, and it affects the melanin in your body, mm-hmm. which is not only affects your skin and hair, it also affects your eyes, is basically what you're saying.
Yeah.
Through that, you have 5 different eye conditions that I guess kind of compile and form whatever your current vision is.
Yeah.
So what would you describe your current state of vision? Like, what would you say your current field of vision is?
So I'm considered legally blind, but my vision can change throughout the day depending on how tired I am or stressed, or if I'm outside a lot, like my environment. Everything kind of impacts my vision because I have all these different conditions, and they all kind of overlap. So that's why it's not like a curable thing or something that you can easily fix or accommodate. So currently I'm about 2200, but it can fluctuate between 2200 and 2400, depending on the day.
Okay. Yeah, I relate to that because I have RP and my vision depends on where I'm at. You know, if I'm in like a dark restaurant, my vision's terrible. But if I'm like outside on a bright day, my vision's pretty good. But at the same time, if it's too bright and I'm not wearing like a hat or sunglasses, it's almost like I'm squinting and like my eyes are really sensitive to the light.
Yeah.
I found that like cloudy days, you know, like overcast days outside is like the ideal conditions for me.
That's the same for me. I love rainy days. I'm like the only person I know that likes rain. Everybody else, I know people get like, what is it called? Like depressive mood, basically, depending on.
Yeah, like melancholy, you know?
Yeah, like melancholy. If it's like dark out, I'm like the opposite. I'm like so happy.
Yeah, I don't mind a rainy day either, especially if it's like a lazy Sunday or something like that. You know, those are good days. I even like walking around in the rain as long as it's not like a downpour.
Yeah.
Okay. So you just went through high school, which is huge for everyone, you know, in terms of those years of their life. Mm-hmm. How long have you been living with like symptoms of your disability?
I would technically say I have my whole life, but I didn't have symptoms that really impacted aside from the vision part of it. I was always visually impaired. When I was younger, I was legally blind for a long time. And then like late elementary school, early middle school, my vision started to improve. And vision changing with albinism is normal, but usually your prescription accommodates that change. So it stays overall, your acuity stays where it typically is. But like they say albinism is a stable condition. For me, it has not been. I had most of my life pretty okay vision for a good like second half of elementary, all through middle school and the beginning of high school. I was still visually impaired, but I was used to my vision that way. I didn't really remember my vision as a kid, which was more close to the legally blind. And then when I got to high school, I started to experience like a lot of vision changes that I still am trying to understand, like why it happened or how that ended up happening the way it did. But I went back to being legally blind, and in high school, you're taking classes and you have a social life and you have extracurriculars and you're trying to balance a lot of stuff. And so for me, I was trying to challenge myself. I wanted to go to a really good school. And so I was pushing myself and taking really hard classes and doing all these extracurriculars and things that I'm really passionate about. And I think it was a combination of that and stress and stuff that led to not only the, like in addition to my vision decreasing a little bit back to being legally blind, I started to develop migraines, and I would have them. It's still something I'm dealing with. It's gotten a lot better, but in high school, I would have them every single day, and they were really debilitating. I think a lot of people know what it's like because of COVID, like being on a screen all day, to have like eye pain or eye strain from looking at a screen. That for me has always, at least for most of my life, has been like a daily thing that I've experienced. So I'm kind of used to it. But I had not until like middle of my sophomore year really started to experience like true debilitating migraines. So that was a lot to deal with, but I've learned a lot from it for sure.
Yeah, it's always interesting how we adapt as we go, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I've been very lucky in my life to have people who have taught me how to adapt, how to push through it. I think I've had a lot of people or heard a lot of people say on social media or just like in my life or in the world that it's so great to overcome disability or overcome those symptoms. And I don't think that disability or like a lifelong condition like albinism is something that I can overcome. I think it's something that I have to learn to live and cope with. And I'm really lucky that I've found the strength. That's where I get I guess that's where I'm proud of myself, is not for overcoming it, because I haven't. I can't expect myself to overcome something that's a lifelong condition, but I have found that strength inside of me, that knowledge I've learned from people around me who have been really helpful to me and taught me how to live and cope with it. And that's something that, it takes a long time to come to terms with disability or just anything that anybody's struggling with that's really hard. And so I think it's a personal kind of journey through that. And I want to help other people learn how to do that.
Yeah, same here. And, you're experiencing symptoms way before me. I'm 30 years old. I'm just now starting to experience, more symptoms and notice my vision changing more. Like I'm not legally blind, but my mom is, and seems to be the direction in which I'm headed, So I'm kind of learning as I go, you know.
Well, RP is vision loss, right?
Yes, RP is a degenerative eye disease that affects the retina.
Yeah.
So what happens with RP is it affects your peripheral vision. So so your vision kind of closes in, kind of like from the outside in, like a tunnel. The common phrase is tunnel vision.
Yeah.
And then also the retina has a lot to do with your ability to kind of adapt to light, which I'm sure you're familiar with your vision. So like my eyes won't really dilate or adjust to dark settings correctly. So another symptom that is commonly called night blindness, where very hard to see in dark situations. Even if there is lights in the room, if it's dimly lit, my eyes will adapt. It just takes way longer,
Yeah.
And, I admit, like, I know people who have RP who have vision way worse than me, and they've adapted quite nicely and they're living great lives. And just talking to them, through this podcast has given me so much like relief. It just makes me feel more calm and confident in myself that I'll be just fine. And I just got to kind of pick up on this mentality. I got to be proactive in, learning to be independent with like O&M training and just kind of learning specific tools. And, it takes effort. It's not just gonna, your brain's just not gonna get programmed with the knowledge of how to adapt. But yeah, I don't know.
I think there's a lot of value in having that community, like people that can give you their experiences that I've been helped by that too in my life by other people with albinism. It's hard to find people with albinism who've like experienced vision loss or symptoms that I have experienced, because it's not necessarily the like common occurrence. But yeah, I have been lucky enough to find friends and people, and just people in like the visually impaired, legally blind community, like you even, and that it's super helpful to hear other people's experiences.
Yeah, and that's why I started this podcast. I feel like I say that every episode. I'm like, that's why I started this podcast. But yeah, that's a common theme that gets brought up. It's just who you know and who you surround yourself with is really important, especially for anyone in the disability community, because you want to feel understood and you want to see how other people are adapting. And just like you learn from others, like common things like how to ride a bicycle, or like it's kind of similar like with other aspects of life with a disability. Is like you kind of have to be around people to learn specific things that are so specific and niche to the disability community. You kind of have to jump into that world if you want to learn those things, because no one else is doing it. Like you said, it's hard to find people.
Yeah, no, I think that there's a lot of value in that. And I've also in my life experienced like the value in just having like people who have experienced enough life and been through hard things, regardless of like disability or having the same thing as me, who can teach you lessons that, you wouldn't learn otherwise, or that you need to learn, that you may not even realize you need to learn. I went into high school. I have come out of high school a very different person. I've learned how to cope with really hard things. And I that knowledge didn't necessarily come from like the disability community, though they are incredible to talk to. And I've had so many people who I've met and talked to who have overcome hard things in their life and who I can relate to. But that knowledge has also come from mentors in my life who can step outside of my situation and respect it and understand it without experiencing it, but also, give me hard, honest truths and tell me like it is, like how, what I need to learn, how I can grow, how I can be a better person. So I'm thankful for that, because I think having both that and people that I can relate to on individual level who are experiencing hard things, we can talk and be like, today was great, or today was really hard, and understand each other because we've actually lived those experiences. I think that's like a very valuable thing to have.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of power in just feeling understood. I think when people feel misunderstood, there's a lot of mental turmoil that kind of comes with that. So I think it's good, do as much as you can. If you don't feel like you know someone who gets you, maybe reach out. Social media is a great way to do that, find people, or join a local group or something that has something to do with your disability, like part of the Young Professionals group for Foundation Fighting Blindness here in New York. That's a cool way for me to meet people locally, too, versus just talking to people here on the podcast. So
yeah, people in your own community. That's awesome.
Yeah. And you said something a little bit ago about you faced some really hard things in high school. What type of hardships did you experience while in high school?
Well, a lot of it was kind of things that I already touched on a little, but definitely like losing vision and the migraines, having to learn how to cope with those kinds of symptoms. I didn't know, I was just very ignorant to what it meant to have a migraine. I've had bad headaches before, especially because of my eyes as a kid. But I had never experienced like a headache or a really eye pain mixed with a headache that, like made me lose vision, feel disoriented, nauseous. I mean, like so fatigued that I felt like I couldn't move. I'd never experienced brain fog, like feeling like I know what I want to say, but I can't coherently like articulate my thoughts into sentences. Um, all of that kind of hit me at once, in like the middle of my sophomore year. And it was like, it turned into almost this cyclical thing where it was like every day I said earlier, that I love school. So I'd wake up and I'd go to school. I'd be so excited to go to school and see my friends and be in class with my friends. And then by the end of the day, I felt so sick that I like could barely move. And at the time, I think that it was kind of like an automatic coping, um, is like what I would call it. Like my brain, my body was like, you have to do well in your classes. You have to hang out with your friends. You have to get sleep. You have to do all these things, get your homework done, apply to college, all these things. And I kept like focusing on my, passions and goals that my health almost took kind of like a back seat. And, it was just like trying to cope with, the symptoms by focusing on why I'm there, what my passions are, what I'm trying to accomplish in high school, and having a life outside of high school with my friends and family. Um, and so now, like looking back on that experience, it's gotten a lot better this year. Um, and now looking back on it, I think that, I'm very lucky to have been surrounded by the people that I was surrounded by, like supportive friends and family and teachers and, mentors in my life, because, that was a really hard thing to go through, and I've learned so much from it. Um, yeah, essentially, those are the hardships. So, like just a lot of, physical.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think, yeah, that's interesting because I think about that a lot actually. So there's physical attributes that come along with a disability, right? But what I seem to focus on here on this podcast is more of the mental. We talk about both, but we tend to talk here about the mental side of things because there's a lot that goes into that. I think it's nothing to sleep on, in terms of balancing anxious thoughts that appear and out of nowhere and that derive from your disability while trying to be productive and at everything else, like you're trying to do everything that everyone else is trying to do, but you're also balancing, your disability along with that, and sometimes it can make me feel sometimes a little like spread thin, mentally.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm too much is on my mind or too much is on my plate. And so I can only imagine, you in high school with how driven you seem to be in terms of education and your goals there, that was a heavy weight on your back there.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the experience, though, overall, one of the main things that I've learned is that sometimes you have to make choices, and not necessarily sacrificing your passions, but, making smart choices in how you carry them out in terms of like your health. I'm so passionate about like as a disabled person, I am just as capable and just as willing and ready to do hard things and take on challenges and take everything on my plate, just like the typical college student or
Mm-hmm.
somebody with a full-time job or something like that. But, um, it's also about choosing to do things for your health, because your health and your happiness come first. And you can find the balance and be able to accomplish all that you want to accomplish and still, live a healthy life. And that's something that I think at the time going through all that, it was hard for me to even begin to comprehend that concept, because I was so, focused on just trying to get through it. Um, And I think that ultimately, even though I wish I had known what I know now at the time, that there's also like value and lessons to be learned in pushing through something like that, because now I know I can do it. If I can get through that, I can get through anything else. At least is how I like look back on it. So I think it's really, really helpful.
Yeah, I admire that you said that and feel that way, and I agree. I think the more you experience, and the more you kind of are able to wrap your mind around things, and you start almost to feel more comfortable in the same stressful situations. The same stressful situations that used to like almost overwhelm you kind of just become normal, in a weird way. And I think that has a lot to do with like mental fortitude and just keeping at it, and moving towards a goal, So yeah, that's awesome.
And that be applied to so many situations, like using a cane. I just recently got a cane and I use it when I need it. And definitely like what you just said, learning to like understand that you can get through it even if it's hard, or going someplace new when it's bright outside is hard for me because I don't know where to go. Things like that, like learning to build up that confidence in yourself. And I'm still learning to do that. And I think that that's like a journey that everybody has to go on.
Yeah, especially, with disabilities that are degenerative, and they're like ever changing, it's always a process, Yeah. Because it's going to change, it's going to change, it's going to change, it's going to change. And then every time it changes, you have to change your mindset, or at least tweak it a little bit to kind of adapt to each little change. And it's an ongoing process is basically what I'm saying. So it's like it's good to build those habits, early on. That way, the more it starts to affect you, the more prepared you are to deal with it,
Yeah, I give you all the credit for saying that. Like, I can't imagine going through something that is progressively degenerative. I mean, the small experience I had with vision loss really was difficult to deal with, and so I can't even imagine having to continue to cope with that change over and over as it keeps changing.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate you feeling empathy for me. Yeah, and it's funny because it's weird. I don't really want empathy. I just like explaining it because I just want to be like, we talked about feeling understood. We just want to feel understood. And it's like some people may see me and be like, oh, he can still see great, But there is something to knowing that your vision's decaying. There is something about that. I think is worthy of discussing, and I think which makes me a worthy host of a podcast. Sometimes I feel like I am, because RP's such a, we know vision loss is such a spectrum, So sometimes I feel like to be a host of a podcast about disabilities and vision loss, the host should be at the very least legally blind,
I don't think so. I think that it's a spectrum. Like you just said, it definitely is a spectrum. And
I agree.
I think you gain.
That's just how I feel sometimes.
Yeah. I definitely get that. It's hard to like talk about and advocate when your experience or based on your perspective and based on your specific situation. And I definitely understand that. It's hard for me. I use a lot of I use social media a lot for my advocacy, and it's hard for me to, I don't want to speak for anybody else who's going through something that I'm not, or something that's different, but I do, as a legally blind person, I want to advocate for that community. And so that's definitely a hard thing to balance. And I think like you said earlier, you were talking about empathy. And I think there's a big difference between sympathy and empathy. I don't want sympathy. I don't want pity. I'm very proud and proud of myself and confident in who I am. And but empathy can be helpful because it is that understanding. Even if I don't experience the same thing that somebody else does, I can understand that what they're going through is difficult, and I can listen and learn from them. And, I like when people listen and learn from me and when I can share my perspective. So I think it's definitely helpful in terms of advocacy, like that understanding, even if, it's hard to advocate for something outside of what you're going through specifically.
I love that. Yeah. Empathy versus sympathy. I agree. And I'm going to retract my statement. I'm going to say, I don't want sympathy, because you're right. Empathy is a good thing. You're right completely about that. And I think a lot of people do confuse the two. And a lot of people think that the disability community almost wants everyone's sympathy, like we're looking for sympathy, when I think it's quite the opposite. I think we're just looking, like we were talking about, just feeling understood earlier.
Yeah.
Feeling understood is essentially like just people having a little bit of empathy, understanding where we're coming from. That's it.
Yeah. Just looking for empathy, and also just looking for, human rights, just looking for accessibility, for things to be accessible to us, not to be, talked up as inspiration or pitied or looked down on, or over admired, just to be understood and to be respected, as individuals. And part of that respect is accessibility and advocacy, things like that. Definitely.
And, we talked earlier about, what you're into and all that. And it seems like you're really, you mentioned you're into social justice when it comes to the disability community as well as other things, right?
Yeah.
What is your main focus when it comes to, advocacy for the disability community?
Yeah. So, to be honest, it's hard to for me to narrow it down. There's a lot of issues surrounding the disability community. And I think that there are so many important social issues in the world today that need to be talked about and should be talked about. And I think that sometimes there's this view among people that the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or other legislation similar to that has, ended ableism or ended inaccessibility. And I think I see a big push on social media from the disabled community to say, no, that's not true, that inaccessibility is still very rampant in our society. And that can be anything from an accessible crosswalk to in the education system, and to just simply educating people. I'm very passionate. My little self motto that I have for myself is activism and education, because I don't think you can have advocacy, I don't think you can have change without educating people. And so I guess that my focus is just spreading education, not only on what I have been through specifically or on my experience with albinism or with my vision, but also on how the individual person can make a difference in terms of making things accessible to people. And that could be something like your Instagram content, like using audio descriptions, or really anything. And just starting from an individual person can make a difference, but we also need change at higher levels. Crosswalks need to be accessible, and I can't, as an individual person, go out and make that happen on my own. So I think just spreading that education, the awareness that there is still need for change and for accessibility.
Yeah, I agree completely that education is the most effective way to change something, because I think if you don't understand something, you're not going to be able to have an actual opinion on it,
Yeah, definitely.
And that's kind of why I feel and I've said this before, most people don't care about accessibility until they become disabled, and once they become disabled, then they're like, oh, I noticed this, and this, because now it affects you personally. And I think reaching out and kind of, creating that empathy and knowledge is, educating people. And I try to do that with this podcast, just that's why I don't talk to people who just have visual impairments. I talk to anyone with a disability, because I think there's a lot of overlap. And I think it's all in the same boat. And I think I might hear a story from someone who is a wheelchair user, and then I might learn something from that connects to my, visual impairment, and then, vice versa. And it's just education and trying to get people who aren't even in the disability community. I'm trying to like create some entertaining content that maybe they can listen to, and then maybe they'll connect the dots and be like, oh yeah, I've never thought of it that way. And then without having to become disabled and then therefore learn about it through experience, which I don't want that to happen to anyone, I'd rather them learn, through research and podcasts and maybe a movie character or a musician or something, just art. And I think that's a whole nother conversation if you want to talk about like pop culture and how, things like that. But I like, that's kind of my personal viewpoint where I come from. It is just like open discussions and then planting seeds for people to kind of think about and then sit on. And that way they can start to notice things even if they're not disabled themselves,
Yeah. I think what you just said is so true. Like, I mean, it's so important to have to have a connected and like a support system within the disability community, and to have that strong community. And it's also important to take those experiences that you may talk about with friends who are also disabled, or who you can learn from, and also spread it outside of that community. I think, and I think there's more value than like we even realize in just going out into the world and having interactions, I mean, I'm a high school student going into college, so I don't have a ton of like what you would call like real world experience yet. But from my experience in high school, I mean, I've been lucky enough to grow up in a school district that has really prepared me, and I'm very, very thankful for that. But in all areas of life, there are people who are not as educated on disability. And so I've been very fortunate to be able to have conversations with my teachers who I've been lucky to have amazing teachers. But, as much as they're educating me on academics, I've been able to kind of share my story with them and educate them on my experiences. And I think that there's value in that, because even though it's on a small scale, they're teachers or people that I meet, friends, things like that in my life are not, not super important to the disability community on a large scale. But it is important in spreading education, because for the next student that comes after me, those people, those teachers, or people in that community will have some kind of knowledge from what I've shared, and they can continue to learn from that person. So I think that there's a lot of value in that. And then you talked about Hollywood. We could get into that because there's a lot, how things are portrayed in films and media. There's definitely a lack of representation for the disability community, but there's also there's
misrepresentation.
Yes, people with albinism are represented as the evil villain with their laser eyes, and it's just no.
Villains, I know what you're saying when it comes to villains. Yeah, and then blind people are always wearing sunglasses and can't see nothing.
Yep.
There's never like someone who like is just legally blind and can still see something.
Yeah.
I guess that's too confusing. That's so hard for the audience. They can't wrap their minds around that. Their minds would explode if they found out that
they would never be able to understand it.
You can be legally blind and still see.
No, that's the biggest thing. People I don't even say blind, because if I say blind, they're automatically, either way, they're automatically like, you see nothing or you see black, which isn't even a thing. But I say I'm legally blind, and they're like, but how can you see me? And I can still see.
Yeah, it is funny to me because I have a dark sense of humor, and I kind of like how ironic it is, and it's kind of like, it's just so ridiculous that it's funny to me.
Yeah.
But if I wanted to, I could get worked up by it.
I had somebody once tell me that he was like, you don't look blind. And I was like, what? There's a right way to look blind? I didn't know.
Yeah, that's a classic. That's a classic phrase.
Yeah. I think that comes from movies and those stereotypes with the glasses and the cane and everything.
Yeah. Yeah, you guys like wear glasses and have a not even a blind cane, just like a regular walking cane.
Yeah.
And you have to like stare at the sun. You got to like always be looking up to the sky.
Or like look very aloof, or like you don't don't comprehend what's happening in the situation.
Yeah.
A lot of that. It's either like the person is either like the villain and like really overly talented at doing things, or it's the complete opposite. It's never like, oh, that's a normal person who just happens to be blind, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree completely. Do you have any other examples from movies or TV? Because this is kind of fun. that you've like remember seeing something and you're just kind of shaking your head at it.
I really can't think of. I know that Star Wars had a blind Jedi at one point, but I wasn't really angry about it. It was more, I was just like, like, okay. Doesn't seem very realistic to me, but like it was cool.
Well, I will say this as somewhat of a Star Wars nerd. That kind of makes sense because they're using the Force, they're using like it's the mental capacity. They are able to kind of sense things and react based off of their senses and feelings.
Yeah.
So that one makes sense.
No, see, that's why. Well,
I'll chalk that one up to a win,
Yeah, no, that's why I can't really think of any that made me like angry because I thought that one was cool. But
yeah.
People
out there listening, even though we're not doing a good job at giving examples, people know what we're saying. They know where we're coming from. They know what we mean.
Yeah.
And
I want to say there was like I could be so wrong about this. I want to say it was like Princess Diaries or something had like a person with albinism as a character, and it was misrepresented. But that we should fact check that because I'm not the biggest like movie lover, so I don't, and I can't think of any shows that really.
Well, let me Google that. Well, IMDb has cinema's 12 greatest albino or albino like characters. So let's see what they're working with here. The number one is called the albino.
Yeah,
that's his literal name in Gummo.
That's a whole other issue too. They like that they. A lot of people call people with albinism albinos, and like for most people, they're fine with it. I don't really have a preference either way, but like I know that because of things like that, like how it's portrayed in movies and stuff. It's kind of almost become this like slang, and I don't want to say slang, but like a term that's been used to bully. Like when I was a kid, if I was picked on, that's the term that people would use, So I think it's interesting because it's almost like these movie and TV show character and stereotypes like that are creating really negative effects.
Yeah. No, yeah. I was actually, when I said it, I was like, is this like, do I say that?
I really, personally, I don't care, but it is something that like is talked about a lot within the albinism community. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I definitely see both sides of it because I understand the negative, like connotation associated with it, but I also don't think that the average person is saying it like that. So I think it just depends on the situation, but a lot of it, I feel like, comes from those movies. And now that you just brought that up, I forgot that was even a thing. But I know what you're talking about, that character.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think how TV and movies portray it, and that's all I'll say about that. Is just like I'd like to see something a little different. But then again, how like Hollywood's not that original these days, so. Can't expect too much out of them.
Yeah. I like, and maybe this is a small thing, like bone to pick, I guess, but I'm very for if a TV show or a movie is going to have a blind character to cast. There are blind people who went into film who want to act, and
Yeah.
I know that there's more. It's more than just the characters, this disability that they're looking for in terms of casting, or that matters in terms of casting. I guess being able to play a disabled person, but like nobody can play a disabled person better than somebody who has a disability, and so.
Yeah, and I went to film school, and I work as a video editor, and so I agree with you, and here's my reason, and I'll play devil's advocate too. So like, you want to cast somebody for the role, you want to cast the best actor because you want the best final product. Sometimes, and let's be honest, there might be a better actor who's non-disabled who auditions for a role for the disabled person.
Yeah.
That might happen, and then the director might be conflicted about that, and they might,
Yeah.
And a common thing that happens is they will book that actress, and then there will be backlash around it. But here's my argument about booking the actual disabled person for the role. My argument and why I'm an advocate for it is there should be more like pop culture icons who are disabled. So if you hire someone who's non-disabled and then they're doing the press tour for the film, or they're on the red carpet, or they're doing interviews, and then they're not disabled, it's not doing anything for the disability community. Versus if you actually hired someone who is disabled, they're doing their same press and all that, more people are getting exposed to it, and more, that's kind of my argument for it.
Yeah, no, I feel like having the person in the role in the first place is really helpful, because you're portraying a character who has that, but it's even more helpful when that person can actually go out into the real world. And, when I was a kid, I didn't turn on the TV and see visually impaired or legally blind people being represented. And if I think that it kind of almost can discourage people from going into, if they're passionate about acting and they want to act, it's hard to visualize yourself in that spot if you don't have someone to look at. So I think that representation is so important.
Yeah, and exactly. And then here's another thing too, is like, how are you gonna, like, you never know what kind of talent's out there if you don't like look for it, So
yeah,
you want to encourage disabled people to audition,
Yeah, definitely.
Because they need to feel like there's a market for them in the market, because the movie industry is completely an entertainment industry. It's all about, it's literally nothing. It's all about making money. That's the only thing it cares about, or at least Hollywood's studio system. I'm not really talking about independent films. That's a kind of a different story, but
yeah.
But yeah, I don't want to talk too much about movies and all that. I know it is interesting because I haven't really talked that much about it on this podcast. But yeah, I agree completely, and I think that is it. I like that you're not too upset about it, because it's I could see that being really frustrating, that the stereotypical character who with albinism is a villain.
Yeah. Well, I mean, sometimes it definitely gets me, because like I said earlier, I think that it's definitely not the only reason, but I think that is a very big reason as to why there are so many stereotypes, is because if your only interaction with someone with albinism or with someone with whatever disability is the way that they're portrayed in media, then you're not going to have that understanding or that empathy or that education in the real world. Yeah. So it definitely needs to be fixed, but also, as an individual, I can, in my life, educate people and say like, hey, that's not how it actually is. And so, I definitely want it to be fixed, but for now, I'll just keep telling people like, that's not.
Yeah. Well, maybe you need to pick up a fourth major.
Oh gosh, no.
And go into acting.
No. I don't think you want me to go into acting. I'm not very. I like to sing. I'm not very good at acting. I can't.
Hey, you may never know. But I'll say this, and and I'm not trying to sound condescending or anything. I mean this genuinely in a good way. You are impressively sharp for your age.
Thank you.
And I know that you could take that as like, well, what do you know? Like,
No.
But yeah, so
no, definitely not.
Yeah, so it's cool to connect, and I can't wait to see where your education takes you in regards to what you learn and what you do with it. And I think the disability community is lucky to have you in its corner.
Thank you. That means so much. It's like a literal dream come true for me to be able to talk about my experience. And
yeah,
I hope that in the future I can continue to learn from more people and help other people through what I've been through. But I love listening to your podcast because I learn from everybody who's on here.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I've learned a lot from you. So thank you so much for inviting me and for saying that. That's so nice of you. I really appreciate it.
I'm happy to talk to you, and I think you have a very unique perspective on this, and that's what I'm interested in. So yeah, unique perspectives, unique people, cool stories, cool people. So you fit the criteria, so that makes for a good episode. But since you listen, since you were buttering me up there, you like the podcast, that's awesome. You know how these episodes end. I like to have my guests give a shout out to a nonprofit or organization, charity that they want to hype up,
Yeah. Okay. So my shout out is going to go to the American Association of People with Disabilities, because I think that their activism and advocacy efforts and the education that they're spreading is awesome. And that's what I'm passionate about. So I really support a lot of what they're doing. And that is definitely my shout out.
Cool. Yeah. And for those listening, if you want to learn more about that organization, just click the show description and I'll have a link there to the website and you can learn more there. But I think that's it for this episode, Olivia. I think that's all there is for this time around. Thanks so much for your time. And like I said, I'm happy to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. No problem. Take care.
Bye. You too.
And that's a wrap on episode 39 featuring Olivia O'Connell. What a wonderful person, and she's going to crush it, and I can't wait to follow her career. She's got a bright future ahead of her. As mentioned, click the show description. I'll have helpful links there that you can click on that will take you to places that Olivia talked about. And before you go, don't forget to follow or subscribe to this podcast on whatever streaming platform you're listening on. And definitely follow this podcast on social media. The handle is @SeeThroughPod. And if you want to get in touch with me, feel free to DM me on social media. Or you can email me at theseethroughpodcast@gmail.com. If you're new to this podcast, I release an episode every week, so keep tuning back in, and I hope you'll stick around and listen to more episodes. Speaking of more episodes, there are 38 other episodes, so if you liked what you heard during this episode, go check out some old ones. But until next week's episode, you know the drill. Stay transparent, everyone.